Thank you all again for joining us. We're really excited about this event. We wanted to take the occasion of changing the name of our program to Engagement Journalism to, have this event and talk a little bit about the current state and future of engagement journalism. And I apologize in advance if I ever accidentally call it Social J. Habits are hard to break, but we figured that since engagement has been embraced by even more newsrooms since we started the program 6 years ago, that engagement was just a term that's a better fit for what we teach, and would eliminate the confusion that the entire degree is only about Twitter, which, I love Twitter, but that's not the only thing that we do, or other social media. It's really been, a wild ride starting this degree. There's certainly things that we had to learn along the way, but I will say the pride of my life and career is just our alumni and the things that they're out there doing in the world. And several of them are part of the event today, not only the alumni panel, but other things as well. And trust me when I tell you there's more that we could have also included in that, and some of them are here in the chat as well. So without any further yammering from me, I'll just pass it to Jeff Jarvis real quick, and he can tell you a little bit.
So I can yammer. Thank you, Carrie. I'm old. I've had a very long career. In my entire career, I am proudest of all of having a role in starting this program. It is a Trojan horse meant to change journalism. We are the heretics, we are the revolutionaries, we're the people asking the tough questions. This is the best opportunity I've had in my entire career in journalism. For that, I thank Dean Sarah Bartlett, whom you'll hear from in a minute, who inspired this degree when she pushed me on the points and said, okay, are we teaching this stuff at CUNY? Then known as CUNY, now known as Newmark. And when I said no, she said, okay, how about a degree? And I said, cool. And so next thing we knew, 9 months later, the door is open. And the smartest thing I have done in my career is to entice Carrie Brown to come here and to start this program and make it her own and bring in phenomenal faculty and great students. And like Carrie, the greatest pride of all is in our graduates. They take the torch. They're the ones who are the Trojan horses in newsrooms across the country, bringing the gospel of engagement journalism. This dog will answer to both names. I have no problem. And they're the ones who are changing the field, which needs changing. So I'm grateful to you all, and especially to you, boss. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. That wasn't really yammering, but we'll take it anyway. And thanks to Carrie and Melissa and Matt and the entire team at the J-School that has brought this program so incredibly to life. I'm not a huge successful tweeter, but I did manage to put something out earlier that when I saw the lineup for today, I was like, oh my God, I have to hear from every single person on this list. This is an incredible event. So just as Jeff is proud, I am proud that our J-School is the starter of this program, that we've seen it through these first 5+ years, and that we're smart enough to and confident enough to change our name in the middle of it, to acknowledge that we think this is a clear fit. And I have just seen it grow every single year, and I know it's going to continue to grow. And I think it is the future, and we're starting to do a better job of integrating it into our other journalism degree as well, to reflect that strength. So I don't want to get in the way of this amazing event any longer, so I'm going to turn it back to Melissa. But thank you all for coming, and onward.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you. And without further ado, we want to jump into the first of 3 conversations today. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then pass it over to our moderator to get the conversation started. So this first panel I'm super excited about. We're calling it How Journalists Are Engaging with Diverse Communities in Philadelphia. I'm native to the Philadelphia area and know a lot of these folks really intimately, and I'm just really thrilled to hear about the work that they're doing in their newsrooms and how they're connecting with these communities. So just briefly, I'll introduce the panel. So moderating will be Sofiya Ballin, who is an award-winning independent journalist and writer. She's also the creator, producer, and director of the Black History Untold project. And then panelist, we have our Tauhid Chappell, who is a project manager for Free Press's News Voices project, which is focusing on reimagining how Philly's local newsrooms approach their coverage of crime, violence, and the criminal justice system. We have an alum of our Spanish language program, Yesenia de Moya Correa, who is the communities reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, where she also founded a Spanish language news product called El Inquirer. Next, we have Aaron Eaton, who is currently the digital coordinator, video producer, sports and business editor at the Philadelphia Tribune. And then lastly, we have an engagement journalism alum from my cohort, Christine Villanueva, who leads Resolve Philly's Equally Informed initiative, which provides news and information to Philadelphians affected by the digital divide. So again, we're so excited to have you. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Sofiya to get the conversation started. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa, Jeff, Carrie, and Sarah for centering us in this conversation. And shout out to CUNY as a whole for facilitating this conversation. I'm extremely excited about this. This is something I'm passionate about as someone who is a lover of Philadelphia. I love this city. This is the city where I became a woman. I'm here right now. You know what I mean? Where I became a woman, where I grew into my career. I'm right here in North Philadelphia as we speak. And I'm excited to have a conversation with folks who are doing incredible work and also represent what Philadelphia looks like to me, the Philadelphia that I love looks like. So I want to dive right into that, you know, speaking to what Philadelphia looks like, right? It's what people would call a minority majority city. And I don't like the term minority because there's nothing minor about us, but it is a minority majority city, but yet our newsrooms in the city do not reflect that. I would like, and this is a question for the entire panel, how does your work bridge the gap between the communities in Philadelphia and the newsrooms and the stories that are told about them? Yesenia, you can start.
Well, thank you, Sofiya, for starting us off on this conversation with such a difficult question, because when you're trying to change, you know, the ways that coverage is done in newsrooms that does not include our narrative and our stories, it's very disruptive. So you have to find mechanisms depending on what is available, how much opportunity you have to be able to tell these stories. And in my case in particular, working with the Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx communities, you know, we're talking a pretty diverse group of people, you know, and trying to be able to get the leeway into the editors understanding how these stories should be told for the people is always difficult to navigate. So in the ways that I've been, you know, trying to find how to tell these stories is first, I've been trying to understand what people want the Inquirer to cover around them. You know, we're talking about the paper of record in this city that has not been doing a responsible coverage for marginalized populations and communities. And you have to understand that you know, that hurts. And some people don't necessarily want the Inquirer to cover them. We have to understand that that's a reality. And for those who do want to, you know, give us a little space into their daily lives, I try to listen. You know, what can I report? What is important to the community? How should I be covering this? And I actually take it from there. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. And, you know, thank you so much for your transparency, because as you mentioned, it's disruptive, right? It goes against the entire of what journalism in America was built on, being able to tell the stories of people who are marginalized. So it's not easy. And I want to get to the challenges later, but I want to hear from anyone else on how their work is working to bridge that gap between the community and these publications.
Cool. I think I can go next. We do that in a number of different ways at Resolve Philly. I think we're best known right now for our Broken Philly Collaborative, which is 26 newsrooms in the Philadelphia area, and just like trying to find a way to work collaboratively with all of these newsrooms and creating an ecosystem of information. And I think that where my initiative, Equally Informed, comes in is like understanding that not everybody is on the internet and not everybody is like consistently on the internet. I think everyone in Philly knows that there's just like internet problems all over the place, and like we find ways to kind of like, I don't know, low-key call out Comcast and Verizon. I mean, there's that. We do that in two main ways, which is through a Q&A text line, which is personalized. So my two colleagues, Lily and Gabriella, Gabriella handles the Spanish text line, are able to answer any of these questions around, well, predominantly we're getting questions right now about COVID-19 and like the vaccine rollout, as well as voting things, and also a community powered newsletter, which I'm super excited about because I literally just launched this thing yesterday called the Info Hub Captains, which is just this cohort of resident community folks who just like know what's happening on their block. And it's like taking that information that they know about and like putting it into this newsletter, which is helping to kind of bridge all the different neighborhoods, I guess, and like in Philly, and to provide solutions to things that people like really want to start, I don't know, reimagining what life in Philly looks like. So yeah, those are a number of different ways that Resolve Philly tackles that issue and brings communities together.
Thank you so much for that, Christine. I think people do forget that there's still very much a digital divide, and that we have to work to make sure that these, not only tell these stories, but to make sure that these stories are accessible. So thank you so much. Tauhid?
Yeah, and the work that I've been doing, working to change how journalists are covering crime, police, and the criminal legal system, I work with 6 different community organizations. The majority of them work with people with lived experiences, i.e. those that have been incarcerated or impacted by police violence or the criminal legal system in some way, shape, or form. It's really apparent, and even for me, as someone who used to work in a newsroom, I used to work for the Washington Post and the Philadelphia Inquirer, it's a learning lesson to recognize that many of our readers and many of the people who consume local news do not know how the sausage is made, so to speak. There is an inherent misunderstanding, and really not an understanding at all, in how the media is created, why the news cycle is the news cycle, how journalists do their jobs, how editors make decisions. And on the onus falls on the reader to try to figure that out. And there has not been historically investment into educating people on the media, on educating people on why journalists matter, on why journalism is important. And because of that, you have a very big disconnect in the perception of how journalists do their jobs, for better or worse, and how that is actually perceived in the work that actually comes out of these newsrooms. And so for me, it's really first talking about, what don't we know? What don't we understand or recognize? Because we can't identify the media apparatus, we can't understand how we can actually change it for the better to actually keep our communities not only informed, but safe and civically engaged.
Thank you so much, Tauhid. Thank you. Aaron?
I think here at the Tribune, we have a rich history and legacy of telling stories that reflect the African-American experience, almost over 136 years. But I think today the work that I'm doing is trying to push or erase the idea that Black people are a monolith. There are different shades. We come in different sizes, shapes, shades, colors, everything. We are different people. So I want to kind of put that out there and bridge that gap and erase the idea that we're all the same and tell our different stories. So that's some of the work that I'm working on right now.
Exactly, that diversity within the diversity, right? And explaining that we have different backgrounds, we have different beliefs, different sexual orientations, all of that, and not painting us with a broad brush and making us these one-dimensional people, which thus dehumanizes us, right? And completely defeats the purpose of telling our story. Now, Tauhid, I want to ask you, Free Press, part of, I was reading up on their mission, and they said media and technology can be used to oppress people or to liberate them. Can you tell me how you've seen that in Philly, both sides of that coin?
Yeah, so the oppression, I think, is very apparent in day-to-day coverage, in which you just so eloquently said, Sofiya, that Black communities are often painted as a monolith. But also the oppression happens in the sourcing and the contextualizing and the framing of stories that impact Black communities, diverse Black communities, first and foremost. And when you don't have the representation within these news organizations, especially people and journalists coming directly from these communities, you're going to have an inherent disconnect on the issues that these neighborhoods and these communities find important. So the oppression is written and really written all over the news. When you don't come from these communities, when you're not talking to people on the ground who are doing the work to address violence and poverty, et cetera, when you're only giving experts that you deem experts, whether those are academics or police officers or politicians, the reality is distorted and framed in a way that is very hard to understand and grapple with the systemic issues that connect all these issues together, right? So the oppression is very real, right? Because the disconnection and the representation is lacking. But in terms of liberation, the one good thing I will say about platforms like Twitter and social media, I will give them this, is that it democratized information sharing. Now you are able to speak your truth and build your own audience and gather your own community and raise the issues to your people without having to rely on the news gatekeepers that usually and historically have had the control of how people consume their information. So when we're talking about technology liberation, we're talking about being able to utilize these platforms for the benefit of liberation. Even though these platforms are inherently oppressive and racist, we're using them to the best of our advantage to get our stories out and tell our truths.
Thank you so much, Tauhid. I love that you mentioned, people that are deemed experts. I think when we talk about traditional journalism, what is traditional, right? So much of what we deem traditional is just white. And I think that the work that the Free Press does, and especially with Media 2070, is get to the root and talk, and they discuss and explore reimagining all of it and pulling it out from the root. Thank you so much for that. Jacinia, I read that you came up with the idea to write in both languages. And I don't know if it's the same now, so forgive me, but in the beginning, you were doing a bulk of the writing for El Inquirer. I will roll my R's, but I'll embarrass myself. But please tell me a little bit about why you decided to what made you make that decision to write in both languages and just the process of bringing El Inquirer to life.
Muy bien. I like that, Sofiya.
Hablo un poquito español.
Pero está buenísimo because the reason behind the whole integrating Spanish into the Inquirer's journalism is basically because I spent time listening to leaders and representatives of the different Latinx communities in Philadelphia. And one of the needs that came, and recurred again and again and again, either from community journalists or, religious leaders, people in nonprofits, you name it, they were saying there was a need for fact-based quality journalism in a language that the community was more proficient in. So El Inquirer comes as a miracle of God to be able to make the Philadelphia Inquirer's journalism more accessible, more inclusive, to be able to not only have representation of these communities in their own language, but to give them the option to be able to read in the language that they understand better. And please, let's make a reminder here. Our communities are not deemed to speaking one language. So when we say, oh, en español para los Latinos, no, it's not in Spanish. You don't do Spanish for Latinos because you have Hispanics who don't speak Spanish in this country. You have, Latinx that only speak Spanish. You have people who do not speak any of those two because they actually speak Portuguese, or they are Black and Indigenous heritage that they have dialects from African and Taino roots. So, we can't, specifically say it's Spanish for Latinos, but in this case, in a city where the 45% of Latinx population in Philadelphia is still Spanish-based, there is an importance of having that offer to be able to give them journalism in their language so that they can take decisions, informed decisions, have access to information, which is also something that we're trying to bridge here, right? The unequal access to information. So the way that Inquirer came to birth, to life, right, is that need was identified. And, I know that this is a specific, you have to have the skills to be able to do so, but if they're there, why not? Because there's a need. So I just, pushed 1,000 times to be able to get support internally, to see that there was importance, that there was value, that there was even, possible revenue streams from offering to the communities access to information in a language that they were more proficient in. So, after a lot of pushing and shoving, we came to translating the first article. After translating a bunch, someone went rogue in the product team, and we actually built a site. And after that, we're in a place where, yes, the majority and the bulk of the stories that are being specifically translated from English to Spanish, but it's all reporting that comes from, by, and with the communities. It's in our sites, and we're serving the community. So there's a space. Now we just need to, put a little bit more machinery into it.
Thank you for that. And thank you for also mentioning some of the rule breaking that has to happen in order for this to come to happen, the disruption, the revolutionary acts that have to happen. What has been the response from the community when it comes to Inquirer, the Latino community?
First of all, it's a space where they can see themselves, right? So it's something that I know it's public because the Philadelphia Inquirer commissioned an audit from Temple University recently, and the numbers show that from the population of stories and sources that were audited in a given year, from July 2019 to August 2020, the numbers show that only 3% of our sourcing are Latinx in the entire coverage of these 14,000 sources that they were studying, and that we have a beat dedicated to Latinx reporting, so that says a lot. And when people see themselves represented, that's one thing in both languages. But then when you have it in a language that you understand it better, you can actually grasp the information in a way that either you digest it and you create knowledge out of it, or you actually get the opportunity to share that knowledge to other spaces, and also helps you take decisions on it. So, for example, one of the leaders of nonprofits for the Puerto Rican community here in Philadelphia recently understood that it was important to publish this in that nonprofit's newspaper. And that's why today we have a project from the Philadelphia Inquirer printed in a Spanish language community newspaper. So, it becomes in Spanish Latinx world, the Inquirer becomes mainstream now because it's printed in Spanish. That's how the communities are receiving and accepting this kind of work.
Wow. Thank you so much, Yesenia. And I love that you talked about, seeing yourself, right, in these stories. And Aaron, that reminded me of your work, right? I was watching a lot of the work that you've produced, and I'm like, wow, I was getting emotional. I was like, this is the Philly I know, right? This is the Philly I see when I step out into my neighborhood in North Philly, right? The Black-owned businesses, the entrepreneurs, the families, the joy. Like, this is the Philly that I know, that I wish I would see more often. Is that something that you think about when you go out and you produce and you're shooting this work and you're editing and you're interviewing folks? Tell me a little bit about how you frame this.
Definitely. I think for me specifically, I started at the Tribune around 2019. I made it a point to kind of go out and be involved with the community. So I would definitely go to community fairs, health fairs, programs at school, just to kind of show my face and be with the community, to understand what Philadelphia is. I had no idea, what the city of Philadelphia was, kind of, if I can kind of say that. So I needed to experience it. I knew that in order for me to tell these stories of Philadelphians and, the joys they have, the struggles they face, I needed to be one with the community. So I spent probably about 6 months, almost to a year, not even out in the community telling stories, just being there. And when I felt that I had a kind of a great grasp on what the city was, I was able to go out and tell these stories, or allow these people to let me tell their stories, is what I like to say. I think that if the first time that I meet someone is for me to do an interview or to do a video, I think I failed the community. I want people to recognize me, who I am, and what I do. And I am here for you to tell your story. So a lot of the videos that I produce on the Tribune's platforms are just people telling their stories. There's nothing special, nothing creative about it. Just me there with the camera, and what you see is what you get. It's Philly. So that's kind of how I was able to create this great content, because we have great people in Philadelphia who are willing to tell their stories. You know, there is a level of trust. No 6 months or to a year that I spent in these communities of just showing myself and saying, hey, I'm here for you. That worked wonders for me and my career here at the Philadelphia Tribune, sorry.
No, thank you so much, Aaron, for like speaking to the work that goes into building the trust, right? The 6 months to a year that you spent there. And, you know, it's interesting that you say, you know, it's not anything special, right? And in a sense, you're right, but it also is, right? Because you're showcasing Black people just living. And typically when we're written about, it's like either there's violence, there's something, or like extreme excellence, Black excellence. There's very rarely do we see stories about us just being, right? Because we are people too. And it feels weird to say that. We are human beings too. So it is special. But it's special in its monotony and the mundaneness of it, right? So thank you for that. Christine, you know, I read a really interesting piece that you wrote, and I want you to speak about it. And you wrote about kind of how the media's response to violence against Asian Americans and what it revealed to you, right? So can you speak to us about what it revealed to you about engagement, and also just how much these outlets knew about the Asian American community?
Well, I think just from my experience that like, it's been downplayed a lot. I think a lot of folks in the Asian community and the API community just like saw this coming from a mile away. And in my previous job, we had done at Public Integrity, we had done a project on the rise of API hate, and even finding that in previous like government documents, folks had like seen this coming, right? It's like there is power in language and in rhetoric around, you know, blaming a particular country or a particular set of people for spreading a disease that is like just naturally occurring, right? And I think that for me, it was just kind of like this call to just like let newsrooms know, like you gotta let people of color and journalists of color like really lead your reporting on all levels, right? It's like, you know, and this isn't to shade anyone who's crowdsourcing anything right now. Shade them. Oh, all right, I'm gonna shade them. I think we can do both, right? We can shade people, and we can also be like, hey, like this is progress in the direction of getting community feedback, which is always good in journalism. But I think it's like, hey, man, if I wasn't a journalist and I was just like, you know, doing my thing or whatever, and someone was just like, hey, we're crowdsourcing stories of AAPI hate, I'd be like, well, you know how many times I've been followed? You know how many people like within the span of a year like didn't want to sit next to me on the metro? Like, why are y'all showing up now, right? So it's just like thinking about like what are, and also like there are activists and other community organizations that have been doing similar work. So it's just like thinking about, I keep saying this over and over again about like this ecosystem, right? And it's more than just newsrooms. So it's like, if you think about the information as like a system, then you start thinking about like, what is my newsroom's role in like reporting these stories out and like giving people the information that they need, one, to like mitigate this situation, and also just to not continue spreading the rhetoric, right? It's like a balance here. But yeah, I think that like I would really like to challenge newsrooms in doing better with that, right? It's just like, you're not the end all be all when it comes to information sharing.
I think you brought up a great point in terms of letting journalists of color lead on stories that pertain to them. It sounds so radical, huh? Like, you know, it's crazy that it's wild that that's something that has had to be explained, you know, so often in newsrooms. And I think that, you know, diversity has just been this word that people throw around, and it's kind of like, okay, I'll hire the people we need, so it looks like we're being diverse. but it's like, what is actual inclusivity? What is actually trusting them and empowering them and letting them tell the stories that they understand best? And to anyone who works at a publication, I hope you hear that. Trust the journalists of color to tell the stories that pertain to them, right? Trust and understand that you do not understand, right? And know when to let them take the wheels on that. So thank you so much. And again, I say shade them because I want this to be a very transparent conversation filled with accountability and opportunities for real and true growth. And with that, I want to get into what are the challenges of doing this, right? Because we talked about it and it sounds nice and it sounds great, but it is hard, right? You know, we can talk about engagement journalism, but it's difficult when you are actually in the newsroom and you're trying to pitch these stories. And then the response is, oh, if you do what people want, then it's not objective, right? I'm coming from I worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer. There was a period where Black Lives Matter, saying Black Lives Matter was deemed controversial. It was seen as subjective. Right? The idea that saying that Black Lives Matter was not objective. So, and I had to push, similar to what Jasenia said, so many times just to get a simple story out, just to explain that Black Lives Matter, right? And I got tired and I left. But I applaud the people who are still there pushing and fighting. So please speak to the challenges that are sometimes faced doing this.
Well, Sophia, as you just pointed out, you know, being Dominican and covering Dominicanos and Dominicanas, well, probably is, you know, a problem for some people. But definitely it just gives me so much better insight into how that particular community and their subgroups actually interact in different spaces in the United States. You know, as a Dominican who was raised on the island, I have insight of, you know, many things that many Dominicanos in the United States don't have, just because of that. So actually, if we flip it around and we start looking at, as we say in Spanish, el vaso medio lleno y no medio vacío, so the glass half full and not half empty, you will actually see that there's a lot of opportunities and values to giving a space for the people to be able to talk about the things that they have, you know, that they resonate, that they have understanding, expertise, you know, closeness to, because they understand it better. So yes, there is challenges when it comes to covering my own community in Philadelphia. And that is a thing. That is a thing. And it's not direct, you know, it's subtle, but it's there. Those are things that we have to navigate. We, you know, I have colleagues in my newsroom, and we try for the colleagues to be able to cover it so it doesn't go uncovered. And we try to share, you know, the expertise and the knowledge that I have, so that that the community still sees themselves represented in the newspaper. And it's not just about representation; it's also about the voice. You know, you as a Philadelphian know there's very particular ways that a Philadelphian says things. And that also happens for Philly Dominicans. That also happens for Philly Ricans. Those are Puerto Rican descent. That happens for, you know, Philly Colombianos. That happens for everyone. So, you know, how do I also include a voice from them in either language that still represents that identity of being raised, of being born in Philadelphia, and that is kept in the copy, you know? So that is also a challenge, you know. How do you, girl, I know you know what I'm talking about. So, you know, the thing here, right, is not just we have a photo and it's there. We have a story and it's there. I mean, you have to be as integral and holistic as possible to be able to have people really see you invested in their communities. And it's not just about writing stories about them, is actually doing the stories that are in favor of them. And that includes stories that are going to fight for whatever they need in their neighborhoods right now. That includes periodismo de intermediación, which is a practice in journalism in the Americas, where a journalist puts themselves in favor to mediate for other people in the communities to solve their problems. And that's what they are expecting from you. So the challenges is that not all of your managers understand that that's your role as a reporter for the communities. That's one thing. And the other one is that you have to do a lot of listening and engagement energy and vibes put into this to the extent that you can really grasp people's needs and people's interest. And not everyone is willing to pay for that. Not everyone is willing to give you the time to do that. And you have to invest in that type of engagement to be able to do this type of journalism.
Wow, you said it. You said it. You said it all. I just want to speak to some of what you said. I completely understand. And that's an issue that people are still having in newsrooms, right? Where they're trying to speak to their community. And then their editors, like, who may not be from that community, might be like, I don't understand this. Or is this really a story? And I'm like, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean something to someone else. Just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean that's not a story. And then you end up in the copy spending so much time explaining something that you know your community understands, then you disconnect yourself from the community, right? And I want to speak to what you said about investing, because that goes back to this. Do people really want diversity? Do you really want diversity and inclusion? Do you really want to tap into those audiences that you say you don't have? Because if you really wanted to do it, you would invest. It's not going to happen overnight with one project, right? And one time you do it. Just because you speak to them one time doesn't mean that that's enough. You have to do it continuously because you haven't been speaking to them for years. Amen.
Generations. Let's
For
say
generations.
11 years. This is historical.
Generations.
This is historical erasure. This is historical harm, and this is a historical division of realities when we really think about it. I mean, I think the audience knows that, and this may be controversial for me to say, but whenever you do break into the traditional newsroom market, you do take a space of privilege, right? We have privilege to resources, we have privilege to platforms, we have privilege to exposure, right? But when the majority of this industry comes from inherently privileged backgrounds, when many of our journalists are coming from white communities that are already set up with privilege, it's the reflection is not going to be there, right? And so you're not going to have people going into North Philly. I remember one editor saying that, in the couple of years that they had been in Philly, they had never gone to West Philly or North Philly. And I'm like, you've been in this city for a couple of years and you have not even ventured into North Philly and West Philly. So you can only imagine how often that's been going on in this industry, especially in Philly. There's that disconnect. And then what Christine said about, oh, now you show up. You only show up when there's drama, when there's theater, when there's violence, but you haven't even done the basic community listening. It's actually funny that it's such a novel idea of just hosting community engagement listening sessions, really, because again, news unfortunately is less of a service and more of a product. We still have to recognize we work for corporations, and no corporation would ever release a product without a focus group, without actually getting people to test, without getting feedback from people. So why aren't we embedding that same direction and rhetoric within our newsmaking process and just listening to community members first and foremost and working with them to actually improve our product? And then maybe we would actually start serving the information needs that are so vitally needed in this city.
Tauhid came to preach. Take your time, Pastor. Aaron, Christine, do you want to speak on the challenges of telling these stories?
Oh, yeah. Well, I spent 3 years in Washington, D.C. before coming here. So it's just like politics, right? It's just like, and I said this at another thing this week where I was just like, yeah, it's either like Congress is like tabloidy news for like nerds, or it's like, it's just like, or like politics within your newsroom. And a lot of the time it's like, sometimes it's like tit for tat, right? Like that's how you get shit off the ground. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I supposed to cuss?
No, go ahead. We're grown. Go ahead.
But yeah, it's like, it's like, it's like, oh, if I help, if you're in a white majority newsroom, right? It's like, oh, well, if I do all the bitch work for this person, like maybe they'll show up for me. Mm-hmm. Or people don't get over their white guilt. And they're like, oh, well, I was supportive. And it's just like, in what way? Like, how did you show up? Mm-hmm. It's just like, and again, it's about challenging. I can say this, I'm not in a newsroom anymore, right? Like I'm in an organization that supports newsrooms, but it's like, I would encourage like your like editors to show up, right? Like give your reporters and your editors of color like an avenue to speak up in meetings. It takes work to be cognizant, right? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily, yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm not even gonna hedge it anymore. But it's like, you know, I think that that's the challenge is really, I think that there is a desire for allyship. And I think it's hard to have those conversations. And then when you have those conversations, it's people's natural inclination to get defensive. And then the onus is on the person of color to like soothe someone else who's trying to help you. And it's just like, you know, trying to get folks to be like, hey, can you just like put that aside just like a little bit? And like, can we like focus on the things that actually have impact and that can actually empower the people who are like marginalized in your newsroom? Like if that was like the North guiding star and something that we can focus on beyond like I feel in some type of way about whatever feelings are hurt, then it's just kind of like, you know, we'd have more of an equitable industry, I guess, at least just starting with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have thoughts on that, but I'll get back to that. Aaron, do you have any thoughts on the challenges of telling these stories?
I think for me, I'm privileged, I guess. I'm a Black man that works for a Black newspaper with a mostly Black staff, and I get to tell Black stories every day. But the issue or challenge that I face every day is being able to tell stories for our younger Black audience. I think the Tribune has historically ignored a younger Black demographic, and it's come back to haunt us. As I see that nobody is buying newspapers, especially anybody under 35. So the challenge for me is pushing to engage our younger audience in different ways so that we can survive in this industry. I mean, we've been here for 136 years, and the failure to recognize the future, it could be deadly for us. So those are my challenges.
Yeah. Christine and Tauhid, I want to speak to some of what you said, and similar to you, Christine, when you get to a point where you're like, okay, I don't work in that space anymore, I'm gonna speak for the people who can't. That's where I am as well. So Tauhid, you know, you talked about why wouldn't we be served if it's a product, right? Why wouldn't we be giving our consumers, listening to our consumers and giving them what they want? And you talking a bit about the discomfort. Truly what it is these stories, especially because when we look at the people who decide what stories get told, most of the time they're white. And these stories make white people uncomfortable. That's it, period. Because a lot of these stories would mean that they would have to reckon with the history of what has happened. There have been so many times where I've seen projects and stories not come to light, and I hope that people are listening, not come to light because an editor or a manager or someone could not get over their white guilt and were so in their feelings that it became a disservice to the community that they said they were going to serve. So that is what it is. These things make white people uncomfortable. These stories make white people uncomfortable. The actually creating a space of diversity and inclusion in a newsroom, in a traditional newsroom, makes people uncomfortable because a lot of these newsrooms are a white boys club, period. That's on period. And I'm saying that because I know that I'm in a space where I can. So my next question, since we're having real talk, I'm getting real comfortable right here with y'all.
You know it, Sophia, you know.
Listen, I know. What does the media the newsrooms that you want to see, the media landscape that you want to see look like, right? Because I think when people talk about media now, it's almost very similar to how people talk about law enforcement and policing. It's like reform or abolition. I've heard, tear it all apart, reimagine it, start over. And I've heard, okay, well, maybe we can work with what we have. What does the media landscape that you want look like, and how do we get there?
Christine, would you like to go first?
You can go first. I have to formulate my thoughts.
So in the spirit of Media 2070, in which, for those, I've dropped a link in the chat, for those who have not read the Media Reparations for Black Communities,
100-page essay, by the way.
100-page beautiful essay.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that the industry is currently, with a profit-driven model that focuses on product and less service, I don't think the commercial industry as we see it now should exist in the way it exists now, because it is built on the foundational mission of profiting off of Black harm and harm of people of color. This industry, as we work in, and I dropped a book too, News for All People, it will also talk about the birth of the American media as we know it, made money off of Black slave advertisements. We have foundations that have millions of dollars that have made money off of Black slave advertisements. And so in the future, thinking about the future of this industry, I'm definitely on the side of burn it all down and start from something different. Because at the end of the day, we do not have ownership of these companies. We don't have ownership. We're seeing a shrinking of the media industry. We're seeing venture capitalists like Alden come in and gobble these newsrooms up and wipe them out. And they're all owned by white people. The money's all going to white people. The industry as we see it now cannot exist anymore. It has not done us any good. It has not made our communities safer, and it's certainly not made our communities more informed to actually be able to pass public policy that actually addresses their needs. So in my view, if it were to all burn down, my hope is that we all come together and make a dope newsroom together that actually does the work that we should have been doing decades and decades ago. And there's no excuse. There's literally no excuse to be doing some of these reforms right now within the newsroom. We saw the Kerner Commission report come out more than 50 years ago. We have a plethora of research that could talk about how newsrooms can be doing direct change to address some of these issues, but people have been dragging their feet for too long. And we're seeing the shrinking of the industry as a direct result from our failure. And this is not for us, this is not on us. And I want everyone to know, this is not on us. This wasn't our choice to walk into this industry the way it is. It wasn't our choice to build this industry in the way that it is right now. I wouldn't have built it like this. So why should it survive like this? And what does it satisfy me if it continues in the way that it's continuing? So I am camp, burn it all down and create something new. I know some people are like, let's try to work within the system, but in the spirit of reparations and abolition, it cannot exist in the way that it is because it's never been for us from the start.
I saw Aaron say, Tauhid for president, Tauhid 2020, let me know when you're running. Let me know. Before we get to everyone, Media 2070, that was something that really stayed with me. Like the newsrooms that we know right now, like the traditional newsrooms were built on slave ads. That's how they got their revenue. And can you build something positive from something that was built on so much genocide? So yes, Christine.
Very much on board with the burn it all down. I wake up every single day and I'm just kind of like, how can journalism be an equitable service under capitalism? Mm-hmm. Like I literally am just like, I can't. So I think that's kind of what my camp is right now too. And I think that, you know, in a world where we do burn it all down, just like trying to reimagine how like news and systems would work differently. And I think that like I'm finally in a place where like that question is something that I can start to answer just a little bit in our own way at Resolve Philly. And it's just like, whew, that question is like too smart for just based off of the other experiences that I've had in news. Like I feel like even having this conversation in and of itself is already like a huge deal, and being able to recognize that like the struggles like just publicly is just, it's just a lot.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Aaron, what does your media landscape look like? How do we get there?
I was just going to say just a space for everybody to contribute equally. But as Tauhid spoke, man, he blew my mind. Burn it all down. I mean, I can't see a place where we can keep going knowing the history of this thing and the people in power. And there's no way that we can just keep going. Tear it down, man. Just tear it down.
Justinia.
I mean, what can I say if the reality is, if it never has been built for us, how do we actually make ourselves fit in, you know? Because again, we would have to make ourselves fit in because it's not built for us. And that's the whole thing about structures that are not inclusive or not equitable and do not include our diversity and our points of views. You know, I understand that there's all these conversations about how to be able to do journalism from a nonprofit standpoint. That's also very questionable, like acknowledging, you know, who are the philanthropists and where this money also comes from and how to be able to do that type of work. And then, also a matter of building trust and media literacy, which we don't do as much work as we should do, which is something that Tauhid spoke before, of putting the burden on the people and not, on us. I don't have an answer on how to be able to continue, having an industry that would flourish and would work for all of us, except for, understanding that Spanish is mainstream. Mm-hmm. And that has been the case in not only in Philadelphia, but in this country, even before this country was founded. Mm-hmm. And if we want to do, the specific conversation about Philadelphia, El Habanero was the first independent newspaper in Spanish outside of Cuba, the second Spanish language paper founded in this country in 1824. And that is something that, we should acknowledge that is a reality in the United States, downplayed for many times and many years, and has always been a rhetoric that has affected Latinx communities in this country. So if anything, the media landscape needs to acknowledge that Spanish language community media outlets are not anything that is other than the mainstream in this country.
Can I say something real quick to dovetail Yesenia?
Mm-hmm.
If we are going to even for 1 second believe that these media companies are actually serious, truly serious about making any sort of transformative change, it's going to have to first start with publicly acknowledging the harms, publicly apologizing for the harms, and publicly asking the public, specifically Black and Indigenous and other communities of color, to hold these institutions accountable and work with these institutions to hold them accountable and move them to change. I've been seeing a whole lot of words thrown around anti-racist institutions and wanting to be an anti-racist corporation and all that. And it's like, if you're not going to publicly acknowledge your own historical harms and racism, you're not going to historically ask the public to hold you accountable, and you're not going to publicly and transparently commit to these changes, that speaks volumes. And so until I start seeing people actually publicly being transparent about that, I'm going to be suspicious for a very long time.
And isn't that the role of the media and journalism, right? To interrogate, to be the watchdog, and can you not interrogate? You have to start with interrogating yourself. We're about to wrap up because time is ending, but I do want to say that we all come from communities that tell stories in a myriad of ways. And as we have mentioned, we're in a system that is not made for us. And I think that we need to, I guess we said, burn it down and also reimagine and make space and hold space for how we have told our stories. There's no such thing as traditional, and questioning what we define as traditional. So thank you all for this incredibly insightful and invigorating conversation. I'm ready to get up and go. I might just run just to burn off the energy and come back and write a 100-page essay just like Media 2070. Thank you so much, Tauhid. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Yesenia. Thank you, Christine. Thank you for your time and your love and your incredible thoughts. Thank you. This is an amazing start to this. Thank you, everyone.